Welcome to the, wow, that's pretty booming, isn't it? Is that good?
Yeah.
All right. That's right. Crank it up. This is extremely exciting. This is our final installment of the YAWP Visitors Visiting Writers Series of the year. And it's the last day of classes, so we pretty much just got it in there the last day. Thank you for coming. I'm Ken Cormier, the coordinator of the creative writing program here at Quinnipiac, and I think I was trying to figure, I should know this, but we're, I think, in our 4th year of the YAWP Writers Series. So it's been great to sort of see that go on and on. And in fact, this year, it's been especially exciting. We've had visits from the great poet Martin Espada, who was here this semester. Last semester we had Erasure, another fantastic poet. We also had Joe Richman, who does the NPR Radio Diaries here this year. So it's been a really exciting year, and we're especially excited to finish this year with the poet Hanif Willis-Abdurraqib, who is here to perform, to read his poetry to us. He has a new book out, his first collection of poems, which it's almost out, but he has copies here. This is a brand new book, so it's extremely exciting, and I'm sure that Hanif would be happy to chat with you, sign a book for you after the reading, if you'd like. Books are available here for purchase. And let me just say a couple words. Hanif is a poet, an essayist, a cultural critic, pretty much a prolific writer in almost every way. Originally from Columbus, Ohio, he is the poetry editor at Muzzle Magazine, a columnist at MTV News, and a Callaloo Creative Writing Fellow. I think you're our first MTV writer that we featured at the YAWP Writers Series.
I would imagine so.
Yeah, that's right. It's going to be a requirement from here on in. Hanif has been nominated for the Pushcart Prize, and his poem Hestia won the 2014 Capital University Poetry Prize. As I mentioned, his first collection of poems is just out. It's called The Crown Ain't Worth Much, and it comes out from Button Poetry Exploding Pinecone Press. So let's hear it. Let's have a warm welcome for Hanif Willis-Abdurraqib.
There's a cookout happening. Just like Rae's, what is that? It's like someone like grilling hot dogs. Is that just a thing that happens? Like on a Friday? College has changed since. Thanks, Ken. Thanks for having me here. This is cool. My partner teaches here, so I'll try not to embarrass her. So a lot of my work revolves around pop culture and nostalgia and the kind of the blending of those things. And so, yeah, I'm gonna read a poem about Prince to open up. Prince is dead now, and I was very sad about that. And also because of my line of work, like I'm a music writer, and so a lot of my work, especially lately, has revolved around generating very instant responses to very tragic things, like very instant responses to death. And that has been hard. So here's a poem about Prince. Ode to Prince, ending in a jukebox on fire in Ohio. And the Lord said, "Let every living tongue know the planting of goosebumps across naked skin, and there you were. And the Lord said, let us imagine thirst only as a journey to a deep blue river's cool bed, and you flipped your hair, rubbed your crotch against a mic stand on television, while I watched through a small crack between my grandmother's fingers. And the Lord said, thou shalt not dip thieving hands into the temples of my sweet children, and you bent your name until it fit into the mouth of no one. Years after this, in the bar on Livingston Avenue, I spent nights pulling the gum from between my teeth and pressing it underneath their chairs before leaning my lips into a neck or a shoulder, a mouth folding into another mouth, folding into another mouth, an entire lineage of desire built from your hands. And yes, I have been so desperate for a hero that I have walked 2 pockets sagging under the weight of stolen coins. I have sacrificed everything I have to any jukebox that would cough up your songs as they were meant to be heard. A long, slow undressing of whatever sorrow whispered itself beneath our skin. And yes, I too have rendered myself nameless for the sake of being memorable. And yes, I too have been so desperate to be called by anything that I have fallen into bed and let someone else's desire name all of the things I could not name for myself. And the Lord said, none of my children will make false idols. And the Lord said, none of my children will make false idols, for I have made the real thing. And there you were, on a bike, a halo of purple smoke. There you were in all black, a fingertip pressed to your grinning mouth. There you were in an afro, unbothered and still young. There you were, a million different bodies inside of one body, the whole of any lover you had ever taken. And I watched you sin and be forgiven and sin again without moving a finger. And I watched the lightning dance around you so many times, I began to wonder if you invented it yourself. If it came from the same hands that made the guitars rattle a harsh light into the bedrooms of anyone who had starved themselves on anticipation. Surely this was you. The small flash of shine, a gift when it falls onto a face too beautiful to be cloaked in another second of darkness. The nighttime is everyone's mother. Each of us, first crawling out of it loud and lost, and then returning each sunset to tuck our faces into its soft chest, begging it to never let us be lonely, and yet here we are. I first knew of your leaving by how my friends spoke of the weather, by the way they smiled in remembrance of clouds. This too is a legacy. Anything wet and eager enough to consume the skin can be called a baptism. I have been made holy 100 times over. I have been made holy twice in one night. I have run from the rain and into a bedroom sweat, and I imagine this was always your desire. And the Lord said, we must honor our mothers, so I pull the face of the moon close and kiss its forehead while I ask for forgiveness. I will ask for forgiveness until we get you back, for 1 hour and no more. Tonight, I wish to take someone in my arms who knows nothing of your songs. Tonight, I want someone to hear you when you sing, I am not a human, I am a dove, and I want sudden white wings to push from the tops of their shoulders. Tonight, I want a whole diner to try and hit the high notes, and I want to be your lover, and I want them to fail, but still keep trying, until they wake in the morning with a voice sweeter than the ones they fell into bed with. Tonight on Livingston Avenue, they are tearing down the bar where I learned to love you first and building a coffee shop. They are dragging the jukebox out back and setting it on fire, and I can see your face in the flames from 4 states away. They are keeping nothing but the chairs. A boy, years after this, will run his hands underneath and get his fingers stuck in a kaleidoscope of stale gum. And this is how he will learn your name. And this is how he will learn of resurrection. And he will then know nothing of loneliness. And he will then know that there is always a place where we are never dead. Thanks. As Ken mentioned, this is like only my second, this is the first week I've actually held my book in real life. But my book is here, and you should get it. I'm really excited. The process of writing a book of poems like this was very draining, but also exciting. And I kind of can't believe it's actually here, but it's not like here. It's like here, but it's not actually out until July. So if you get a copy of it today, you will be like one of 50 people in the world who have a copy before it's released. So that's kind of cool. Please don't sell it online. I don't think there's a really big market for that kind of thing, but so I'm going to read a couple poems out of the book, but first I'm going to read a couple poems from this series. So the entire book revolves around gentrification and the generational violence that came out of gentrification in Columbus, Ohio, where I'm from. It's like the poems in the book span like probably 2 decades. Not of my writing. Like, I didn't create the book in 2 decades. I didn't start writing this book when I was 10. But the poems in the book span like 20 years of life in a city and the gentrification that comes out of it. So it was like fucking depressing to write, you know what I mean? And so like when I was done, I thought, well, I want to write something like fun that could also still be sad. And I started writing all these poems prompted by songs I didn't know were about sex when I first heard them. Because there are so many. And I'll read a couple of those now. All the poems are titled after the songs that inspired them. This song is called Girls on Film. It's after the Duran Duran song Girls on Film, which is about porn. Also, this poem is about the concept of ghosting, which I don't date because I'm married. And so like there's all this language around dating that I don't understand. Like, apparently to be ghosted, you all know that, like college kids. Well, some of you. To be ghosted is like when someone like just doesn't call you back or like whatever. Like after, I don't know, we all know. Y'all know this? I trust that y'all do. My friend, I was in New York a while ago, and my friend was explaining this to me, and she was like, yeah, like this guy like ghosted me. Like we went on a date, and he like didn't call or text me, and I was like, it sounds like you just had a bad date. Like it just seems, I don't think there needs to be like entire dialogue, like a language around what happened. It's just, you made bad dinner conversation. Anyway, this poem is called Girls on Film. My friend says he didn't call after driving from an ex-lover's house last month. When the morning came, and he crawled from the window, which poured light into the space he left in the bed. He tells me this is called ghosting, what it means to be defined only by the emptiness that once held you. I ghost everything. A man hands me a sandwich, says I'll see you tomorrow, and I begin to disappear. I come from a fleeing people, first land and then lovers. I have a collection of both over each shoulder. Turns out there's no good way to become dust. Turns out there's no such thing as a clean exit. My mother ghosted into the fortunate dawn that gently gathered her in its yellow palms. I was carried here by a vanishing woman. I was born vanishing. I am a nation of vacancies, a haunting of sorrow. I have borders around my borders. 100 abandoned tongues scattered across the walls of a dark room. I count them until I fall asleep. I wake and remember only a harsh wind. I love nothing that can see its own reflection. And does anyone like Carly Rae Jepsen other than me? Cool. Thank you for being the one person. Do people know who Carly Rae Jepsen is? You just don't like her?
I like her.
Then yeah, I think you would qualify as someone who likes. Did you say I like her songs?
Yeah.
Well, then I think in the Venn diagram of people who like Carly Rae Jepsen, you would be on the like side. She has a song on her album. I like Carly Rae Jepsen a lot. I went to see her. I covered her for MTV, and it was a really magical experience. Kind of. The concert was great, but the venue was awful. Which is just like the way of life, I think, in modern music going. Either you get like a good venue and a bad show, or a great show and a bad venue, especially on the East Coast, I think. New York is... Anyway, this poem is titled after Carly Rae Jepsen's album, which for those who aren't familiar is a very 80s album. It's like the 80s were kind of coughed up in this like pop album. There's more than one way to cover a temple in platinum. Maybe we both long for an era where there were less things to record death. In the interview, they asked if you believe in love at first sight. You said, I think I have to. You didn't say, we are all one hard storm away from dissolving, vanishing into the frenzied dusk, but I get it. I know what it is to walk into the mouth of an unfamiliar morning and feel everything. I touch hands with a stranger who gives me my change at the market, and I already know their history. I suppose this is survival. I will love those who no one else thinks to remember. This is all that is promised, really. There will be a decade you are born, and a decade that you will not make it out of alive. All of the rooftops where the parties were in the year of my becoming are now dust. No one dances so close to the sky anymore. I say, I too am a romantic, and I mean I never expected to survive this long. I have infinite skin. I keep dry when the rain comes. There will always be another era of bright suits that don't quite fit but must. There will always be a year where the cameras are hungry for whatever sins we can strangle out of the night. There will always be another spoon for the boys to lick sugar from. Thanks. So let's do a show of hands thing. Everyone raise your hand and then put your hand down if you don't know what I'm talking about. So let's start from a hands up position. Does everyone know the pop song by a little indie artist named Beyonce called Formation? No, Dana? No? Okay.
Yeah.
Does everyone know the music video that accompanied the song Formation? Okay. This is where I imagine more hands will go down. Does everyone know who Big Frida is? Okay. So this is good for, usually when I read this poem, people know most of those things, but short crash course on all of this. Beyonce released a song called Formation. In the video, people got very angry because she, the gist of the video was not this, but people were angry because she was laying on a cop car that drowned in what was supposed to be a simulation of New Orleans post-Katrina where there was water. That is the main point that you would need to know for this. Big Frida is a black bounce artist. She's like the queen of bounce music, which is a music that is popular in New Orleans. There's a lot of horns and drums. Big Frida has a small interlude that's like a real actual barbecue happening outside. It's like a very, I know, let's go down there. Big Frida has a small interlude in Formation. Wait, who had their hand up when I said, do you know who Big Frida is? No one? No one knows? You know. Are you a fan? I am too. So, and so this poem uses a line from that interlude that Big Frida had in Formation. I was recently in the Houston airport where Beyonce is from, and the Formation video was like on a screen in a bar where I was just sitting waiting for my flight, and I was sitting next to a guy who had on like Confederate flag sweatpants, I think. I don't know how to describe them. They were definitely Confederate flag, a little Confederate flag like number, like a little, yeah, it was odd. And I couldn't help but think, gosh, he probably like hates watching this. Anyway, this poem is called The Day Formation Dropped. It's after Big Frida. The man at the bar in the George Bush International Airport is telling jokes about how Houston had oil once. And then he says the oil left. And then he says Houston had hollow men, widows, children with candle wax melting into the frosting of their birthday cakes. And I think of how we will stop at nothing to make men rich, to drag the oil back, how we pretend the money isn't still slick with it after all these years, and how we imagine the land dry and sinless. And I think of how I am in an airport named after a man who raised a war. And this is America. Black work, black dance, all bodies and coffins and monuments to the people who put them there. And isn't that funny? Not funny like the way it's funny when your father tells a good joke or a bad joke, but his laugh fills the room and you remember that he's still alive. I think this is funny like seeing the edge of the cliff you are barreling towards with no brakes. And speaking of funny, have you heard the one about black people in water? How there would not be one in this country without the other? How the water, our first love, crawls to a southern porch in summer and wishes us back to the womb? A man floats face down through New Orleans on CNN, and the anchors talk about Mardi Gras. And that's the joke, I guess. The joke is that living is a party. The joke is that some invitations got lost in the mail. And yet, here is Beyonce, daughter of Alabama, daughter of Louisiana, well of rich oil sprouting out of Houston's cracked earth. Beyonce on the television, 2 middle fingers ablaze with jewels. Beyonce on the television, her daughter's hair picked high to heaven. Beyonce's back arched on a death machine submerged in the water of New Orleans being pulled below. And I guess the funny part is how the water wants us back, even when it has to swallow the bones of something else to get us. And Beyonce vanishes into the dark wetness, and I look down in Houston and my skin is wet, and my feet are wet. I mean, there is water rising from the cracks in the floor. I mean, the walls are coming apart and a thick braid of ancestors are walking into the room. Big mamas and aunties, pops with a cane to keep his limp steady, great uncles and a few boys who didn't make it out of the cocaine era alive, packed to the walls of a Houston airport bar, each with a dance aching to crawl out of their spines, black and breathing underwater, black and playing jazz at this never-ending funeral, long skirts being pulled up to dance a mean waltz in the aisles, breakers flattening boxes to spin atop a Soul Train line a mile long. Beyonce is submerged in the deep, and the Houston airport is a juke joint. I can taste the salt in the air. I can taste where the sweat becomes just another type of ocean that begs for the skin. I can hear the fresh echoes dancing off the walls. I did not come here to play. I did not come here to play. I did not come here to play. I did not come here, really. I was carried from somewhere else. I was nothing once, and then I was a set of eyes, blooming into the heat, rising out of the slick black oil, a whole new country looking at my body and running a tongue along its pink lips, and isn't that funny? Isn't that the best joke? Isn't that the wind which holds you in its teeth for a soft moment before the fall comes? Thanks. I don't know if I'm a big Beyonce fan, but I very much, there was a while where I didn't really even know what Formation sounded like because I was so connected to the video, and then I heard the song and I was like, oh, well, I guess that's okay too. That's mostly my Beyonce experience, is that like, visually I'm like, wow, this is really great, and then I hear the song and I think, oh, well, okay, that's fine, I guess. So the book is broken into 4 parts. The second part are all poems about how awful I was when I was in college. And I like reading poems from it because I feel like I am, I don't know. I think it's interesting to get older and look back on to have a catalog of how awful you were in a place. Sorry, I hit that microphone. Does this mean I have to leave? I was looking for an excuse to go to the barbecue. Maybe later. Anyway, here's a poem about me in college. The first line is, a lot of the poems in this book, the first line is the title of the poem because I'm really bad at titling poems and that makes it really easy. That's a trick that I stole from a poet named Raleigh from Columbus by way of South Carolina. I feel like I have to give her credit. Dudes, we did not go through the hassle of getting these fake IDs for this jukebox to not have any Springsteen. And it is the end of another summer where I've slept on my couch for days, only allowing another body to interrupt long enough for our limbs to tangle like weeds up the side of a brick house, reaching for something impossible. I promise there have always been dishes spilling out of the sink. It is how I discovered this kind of hunger. Last week, Rick lit a cigarette and yelled across the bar that the only difference between smoking and kissing someone who smokes is the way mouths collide before death sits in your lungs like an abandoned city. And everyone laughed while I tried to wipe lip gloss from my cheek. Most people I know cannot sleep until they crawl through someone else's hollow. There are nights when I wish we were still children, but then again, I suppose we may be, or at least there is no other way to explain how we make every doorway our own, the way we stain ourselves and everything else that moves, the way we scream into the dark like a siren, and the weeping, yet another thing we never mention in the morning. I think I am starting to vanish slowly from head to toe. There are 10 different ways to say sunset. The bartender says I'm wearing all of them. I'm not necessarily, because I've never had, this is like my first book, right? This is like my first book of poems, so I'm not very good at reading out of books yet. I feel like I'm used to like shuffling through papers. It's weird when like all of your papers that you would shuffle to or like have a binding. It's just like, and so in a lot of me, because again, like this is only my second time reading out of it, a lot of me is thumbing through like, wow, this is really cool. And not at all thinking of, yeah. So, I'm going to read a poem about Allen Iverson. Does everyone know, do people know who Allen Iverson is? Allen Iverson is, this poem isn't in the book, but Allen Iverson is one of my favorite people because, well, one, Allen Iverson was like extremely black, like almost overwhelmingly black. To the point, my favorite Allen Iverson thing, so Allen Iverson was playing in the NBA in the 90s, right? In the 90s, they were trying to, quote, rebrand itself under David Stern, and Allen Iverson was not brandable in that manner. And so the NBA was like, hey, we're gonna, and Allen Iverson would wear like cornrows and gold chains and baggy jeans, and the NBA was like, okay, so to stop him from doing this, we're gonna institute a dress code. And the NBA was like, we're gonna have a dress code, everyone has to show up to press conferences in suits or else you'll get fined. And Allen Iverson was like, you're just gonna have to fine me. And so he racked up all of these fines just to keep wearing t-shirts and jeans, right? And I think that is a very small, I think a lot of my work deals in like how to make space in a world where, you know, no matter what your identity is, like if the world is like trying to make the window where you fit smaller, like carving out that space for yourself. And I think Allen Iverson was so important in that. He's inducted into the Hall of Fame this year. He's getting inducted into the Hall of Fame. And there was like a Hall of Fame inductee ceremony at halftime of the Final Four. And everyone showed up in suits. And Allen Iverson showed up in a t-shirt that said, I am Virginia. And he had 5 chains on and like Nikes. And I thought it was great. This poem is in defense of Allen Iverson in 2 parts. Bless the men who grasp at the air where there was once another man dancing before them. His hips in the bright sun he cradled in his palm, already a forgotten memory. Forgive me for ever believing myself fragile. Forgive those who make the work look easy, but if it must be about performance, I prefer sweat to blood, but have given enough of each to earn at least one night without a tie stretched along my neck while I answer questions from a man who has never walked from a shovel with calloused fingers, dirt covering someone newly departed. If gold is the only metal that has never tried to end your life, I imagine you would also let it anchor you, pull you closer to the earth, a chain big enough to see from home, from wherever the people count the hours they've been alive and say a new prayer for each one, where the people clap a hand to each other's backs during a hug that came after a good dap, that came after a how your mama doing lobbed across the parking lot. How much money would you give to keep your hood close? When they hand you a suit? When a man asks you to dress yourself as you would for a funeral? It costs a lot to get out of the ghetto. It costs even more to carry the ghetto with you after you have left it. Lay the coins at their feet and let the world see the names of everyone you have survived in black ink on your black skin. Let the Virginia slang spill mighty from the corners of your half-open mouth. Let the words fall onto the carpet and grow into 100 children who dribble in front of walls trying to shake their own shadows. The waltz that will retire a mother when she can still be held in the gentle wind, drinking cicada songs from the fields and carrying them into the sky, where they sound most like what poured from the parked cars in the projects, their windows down, their tires unmoving, their rims still spinning towards an impossible future. Allen, I wish you a t-shirt down to your knees in any season. I wish it to fall from you the way the holy robe falls from any Messiah. I wish you hair that spills out of whatever thinks itself bold enough to contain it. The rows of corn in Ohio did not make themselves ready for harvest again this fall. Families will have to find another way to make themselves full, but you have endured another year. At some point, every sin must envy the one that came before it, and so on, until the mirror swallows itself upon meeting your face. I close my eyes, and imagine a brown-skinned Jesus sitting on a cracked stoop with a half-empty 40-ounce of malt liquor resting in between his feet, getting his hair braided by someone's auntie who got 2 gold teeth and gum popping in her mouth like tiny gunshots. I imagine the four-wheelers gathering behind Jesus as he walks to the courts in North Philly, the men on them arching their spines to pull the front wheels skyward while mamas watch and whisper, "Them boys ain't got no damn sense," from the edges of a window lined with spent cigarettes. It is hard putting the fear of God into a person who has endured enough to become one. You know this best, Alan. Yet there is no other name I have found for what sat in Michael Jordan's eyes at the top of the key in 1997 while you pushed the ball between your legs, inviting the idol to a dance he didn't have the moves for. This too is the fear of God. The fear that there is something waiting to pull back your mask and hold it to the light. The fear of being merely human and nothing more, and nothing once the lights dim, and nothing once they come for whatever gold you have left. Thanks. I read that last week and someone was like, "You should send that to Allen Iverson." And I was like, that's not how that works. He would get that and say, "No, thank you." But I do really like Allen Iverson a lot. I'm short, and so like I think I'm really short, and I grew up in a really tough neighborhood, and so I think the outcome of that was a lot of my heroes were like short, tough guys. You know, like Pesci and Goodfellas, or like Allen Iverson, or Phife Dawg. Even when Phife Dawg died, I was really bummed out. Phife Dawg from Tribe Called Quest, because he was like short and funny, and I think where I grew up. Being funny was like a survival tactic. So Phife was my guy, and Allen Iverson was my guy, and Goodfellas Pesci was my guy. And they all still are in some ways. I don't know. I watched Goodfellas recently, and I was like, this isn't as good as I remember. All of those like mob era movies for me. I think when I was young, those were windows into another world, and now I'm like, why the did I watch these? Am I allowed to curse? Sorry. I don't know. I don't know if there's rules on the Quinnipiac YouTube channel. I really don't know. Are there? Okay. Sorry. Does everyone know what an erasure poem is? So an erasure poem is where you take an existing text and erase it until you find a poem in it. This is easier with some texts than others because some texts are written by great writers, and it's like, oh, great words you can pick out. It's harder sometimes because, like, if you're erasing like pop lyrics, it's harder. But in my book, in like the last thing of the last section, is an erasure of Virginia Woolf's suicide note. So everyone knows who Virginia Woolf is. Virginia Woolf died. She was like mentally not well, right? And she killed herself by filling her pocket with rocks and walking into the river. But before she did that, she wrote a letter to her husband, Leonard. And it's like really beautiful and also like deeply sad. And I did an erasure of it because I wanted to like carve out the actual poem in it. So this poem is called "The Author Writes the First Draft of His Wedding Vows." Dearest, I feel certain I am going mad again. We will go through terrible times and recover. I began to hear your voice and can't concentrate, so I am doing what seems will give me the greatest possible happiness. I don't think two people could have been happier with this disease. I know that without you, I cannot properly feel. What I want to say is, you have saved me. Everything has gone from me but the certainty of your goodness. Thanks. I will read a couple more and then like we'll do some questions maybe, because I love that. I would love to hear from people. So when I was working on this book, I was considering what it means to be from a place where there's like considerable violence, right? And then like write about it from a distance, like write about it while you're not still sitting in it. I mean, when I go home to Columbus, I still go home, right? I still visit the places where I'm from, but I mean, my life is different now than it was in like the 90s and 2000s, and the stakes are different for me. And so a lot of this book is like honoring and trying to consider the privilege I have to exist in the space now and write about spaces that are considerably more violent. Also, like writing about punk. I grew up kind of at the intersection of punk rock and hip hop scenes in Columbus or in the Midwest in general. So yeah, I don't know. That's a lot. Here's a poem about a friend of mine who, well, not really a friend, but someone in my neighborhood. This is like a thing of legend in the neighborhood I grew up the night when a guy named Mike was severely beaten by police in 1991, maybe 1990, whenever Do the Right Thing came out. This poem is called I Don't Remember the Whole Summer When Do the Right Thing Dropped. And that is also the first line. But I do remember the night police got a hold of Big Mike from North Linden and beat his face into the sweltering brick outside of what used to be a Pizza Hut until it got robbed by some Southside stick-up kids 2 summers earlier. And then my big brother said it had to shut down because ain't nobody gonna get a gun held to their head for minimum wage. And Mike used to deliver pizzas to the hood before the hood woke up in winter with new hungers. And then come spring, Mike was rocking a gold rope round his neck, thicker than the coils in a hangman's knot. And that's when the cops on the east side began to lick their lips and when their hands started to tremble while whispering about what they would do to him if they ever caught his ass, which maybe explains the way his bright blood painted the abandoned brick and the 5 police still pressing their heels into his face even after his right eye swung free from its socket, a grisly pendulum. And my big brother left me home alone and hungry that night when the whole hood ran from their houses and set upon the police with any weapon they could find. And they say that Mike's face was a bloody and wet mess, and they say he wasn't breathing, or they say he didn't have a mouth anymore, or they say all of him was a dark and gaping hole, and they say the police grew fangs, and they say the thick fur pushed through their shirts while Mike bled. And earlier that day, my big brother hid his white Jordans in his book bag when he came back to the hood from his suburban job, and he walked in the door, and he said, "We are all one handful of gold away from a closed casket funeral." And I don't know how many mothers walked from the mouth of that summer childless, but I could see the old Pizza Hut burning from my window, and I could see a cop being dragged into the bushes by the stick-up kids. And isn't it funny how art most imitates life when a body is being drained of it? How easily we can imitate that which is never coming back again to claim space. And when my big brother came home that night, he carried me to bed with a glass of warm milk, and when a drop of blood fell from his knuckles and blended into the white of the glass, I did not ask who it belonged to. Thanks. An interesting thing that I'm realizing as I read through my own book on the way on the plane, which is weird, but like I think when you spend, and I think like this is for like anyone who works on anything, not just like poems or writing. I think when you spend enough time with your own work of any sort, it just all blends in. It just starts to look the same. I'm sure if y'all are like writing papers, right? Like it just like you don't really know if your work is good or if it's even work. It just all looks like a blob of words. So a lot of this manuscript I hadn't spent time with, like real time with, after like it had been submitted to editors. So it was like, and after I got edits back, of course, I didn't just like submit it to editors and then be like, do what you want. And so a lot of this stuff is interesting because it's it feels autobiographical, but some of it is not. And so if you read it, don't think that all of this is my life. There are parts of it that are very much my life. And I think you could probably tell which is which, but all right, I'm gonna close out with a poem in the last section of the book. The last section of the book was written this book had 3 sections initially, and I wrote the last section all after the Baltimore uprising last summer. I was like watching that and writing poems, and I think, and so the last section is maybe not as cohesive as the rest of the book, but I still think it's important. This poem is called USA versus Cuba. It's after Frank O'Hara. It's not about Cuba, really. It's about trying to get to a USA-Cuba soccer game. Which is funny. A journal published it, and someone came up to me a while ago and was like, "I really loved your poem on USA-Cuba relations." And I was like, "I feel like you didn't read it." I think you just saw the title and thought. Yeah, this poem's called USA versus Cuba. It is 3:15 on a Saturday, and I am in a car on I-95 on the way to the soccer game, and Nate is riding shotgun, which is also the name for when you plunge something sharp into a can of beer and split open its aluminum shell before swallowing its urgent sacrifice. And I once saw Nate do this 5 times in one night before the Mount Union game, and we got to the field late the next morning, smelling like something coughed up in the heat of a 1980s summer, and it was almost as hot then as it is right now in this traffic that isn't moving and hasn't moved for what feels like 30 years, which is to say that it feels like we haven't moved since we were too small to speak and burden everyone we love with our refusal to crawl back into silence, and every car on this highway is in park, and somehow people are still pressing on their horns. And Nate turns up the radio, and David Ruffin is singing I Wish It Would Rain, and his voice is unfolding long and slow in the back seat like an eager lover, and there is a whole history of men demanding the sky to shake at their command. And I'm not saying out loud whether or not I believe in God, and I'm not saying out loud what I know the rain means. I'm only saying that I need this dry summer to stay dry. I'm only saying that the tickets to this game cost as much as my best suit, and kickoff is at 3:30, and we are absolutely going to be late, and there is a whole history of black people being late to things, and there is a whole language signaling our arrival, and there is an entire catalog of jokes that dissect this happening, and they never get old, and by they I mean black people in America. And I can hear the joke our college soccer coach made when the only 2 black kids on the soccer team stumbled late onto a hot field, and lateness always makes for a good joke. The punchline is I slept through my mother's final breaths, or the punchline is I stumbled into a living room thick with the family's grief while clearing a night's salt from my eyes, or the punchline is that I'm always running late. I'm always running. I'm always trying to move time backwards and tell everyone I love them. And Nate points to an ambulance speeding down the highway opposite us and disappearing into the sun, and I don't want to think that there might be a body inside of it, and then all the cars start moving. Thanks. Oh, cool. Okay. I was worried that I hadn't read for that long, but it's a very weird feeling to not have to keep track of time. Can I hear questions from people? They don't have to be about poems. I'm always down to talk about like music and like the other writing I do and like pop culture and like shoes. I like shoes a lot. But any questions? But they can also be questions about poems. I don't know. Whatever. Yeah, I can.
So I'm interested in kind of maybe how you started writing. You write in all these different forms. Did you feel like you were a poet early on? Did you feel like you wanted to write about music? And then now that you're sort of doing all these things, do you find a really big contrast between the way you write poetry and the way you write in other commentary?
I was actually, that's a good question. I was a music journalist before I was a poet. I was a music journalist, freelance mainly in like 2010, let's see, when did Michael Jackson die? 2009. So the first assignment I ever had as a freelance music journalist was writing about Michael Jackson's death. I had to write like 500 words, and someone was like, we'll give you 50 cents a word. And I was like, that sounds great. It's like outstanding. And I got, it was for a publication that's not around anymore, probably because they didn't pay their writers very well. Anyway. And so for a lot of years I did music journalism. And then I became kind of bored with the restrictions that music journalism put on me, I think. It didn't allow me the freedom to write kind of comfortably in the way I wanted to. And so I got out of music journalism and in Columbus, Ohio, I started stumbling into like poetry slams and thought, well, that seems fun. I could do that. And then I started writing bad poems and reading at them. And then really kind of diving into a way to make my writing more of a linear thing that crossed a lot of genres, which I don't think I've learned to do until like maybe the past year and a half. And so my approach to writing is really holistic now, right? I think, MTV is great. And I say that because MTV gives me a lot of freedom to write what I want to write in the way I want. They don't alter my voice in a way that I worry about other places doing. And so like if I want to, write a more poetic ode to Prince, like when Prince died, I wanted to write a thing that was not as straightforward, and they let me do it. And so the writing bleeds, it all bleeds together, I think, which is good because It makes it easy. It's not hard. People are always like, how do you write poems and then write this other stuff and then write this other stuff? And I think to me it's all because it's all linear, right? And I don't believe it as separate work. I believe it all as one work. And that obviously is, I benefit from having poems that are more narrative, and I benefit from having essays that are more lyrical. And I think in the middle of that is just like a lot of work can get done. Yeah. Well, there's two people. I'm sorry.
The Prince poem.
Mine's long.
The Prince poem is on MTV site. Did you write?
That poem isn't on MTV site. Now, the thing I wrote on Prince is on MTV site. It's about his Super Bowl halftime show, which is phenomenal. I don't know what it's called, but it's floating around still.
What about your poem? Does it exist?
That poem is new, so I'm probably gonna start submitting it around. But that poem is like a week old, so we'll see. Maybe it will live somewhere. I oftentimes, the thing with poems, and this is another thing with like, people are like, oh wow, you produce like essays at this great rate, and like you produce poems at this different rate. But like as some of you may know, like submitting poems is such more a process, right? Like if I want to write about a musician, all I have to do is like type 1,000 words, and MTV, almost no matter what or wherever, is gonna be like, all right, we'll put this up like today. If I get a poem accepted, sorry, I keep hitting the mic. If I get a poem accepted, it could be like months. I got a poem accepted like last week, and I won't see it live until the end of summer. You know what I mean? And so I hope the Prince poem goes up somewhere, but even if it gets accepted somewhere, that joint might not be up until like Christmas. So I don't know. There were multiple questions. I'm next. Go ahead.
Me?
Yeah.
Which poets do you consider to be your models?
Terrence Hayes is my mentor in a lot of ways. I just want to, I say that first because Terrence Hayes is the most prominent mentor I've ever had outside of Columbus, Ohio. And I worked with him last summer on a lot of the poems that are in this book. I worked with him on. And I think he's a big model for me. Other than that, I really I lean a lot on my contemporary peers. One thing that Terrence Hayes said to me last summer was that he was disappointed with how many poets in my generation of poets look only to poets who are like older and more quote unquote established than them, and not like their peers. And so I'm really conscious about leaning on my peers. So Angel Nafis and Morgan Parker, Nate Marshall is a poet I love, and I think we have similar aesthetics. E-viewing, poets who I think I am kind of tethered to by our generational stand, where we stand in the generation of the canon and how we're pushing the work together. But beyond that, of course, Terrence Hayes, Audre Lorde is important to me. And I think, though she's not a poet, I really count Josephine Baker as a huge inspiration, because I think Josephine Baker was like such a fascinating thinker, and such a fascinating, the epigraph that opened, there are two epigraphs that open the book, and one of them is from Josephine Baker, and the other one is from Marlo Stanfield from The Wire, who the title comes from The Wire. But yeah, so did that answer your question? Yeah.
Sure. Growing up in like the era and like the area you did back then, and living in like the area and place you do now, how do you think those two different kind of things it kind of goes on the next question, like contrast, but also like kind of shape how you're writing, and like which more do you kind of like the identity of like, I'm sure you were very different when growing up in that area than like you are now.
Yeah.
I know they both help shape your identity now. But do you write with identity from either one more than the other?
That's a great question. I am always going to write with the identity of where I'm from and not where I am. That is, I think it is important for me to archive the place where I'm from, if for no other reason, because I come from a place where people don't always get to tell their stories, right? I come from a place where people's stories are not celebrated or are tucked away or historically not as propped up. Now I live in like New Haven, Connecticut, right? Which is fine. Nice, whatever. But like institutionally, right, I think I live in a place where I'm in a place right now where in my life too, like, let me be clear in saying that I'm afforded an immense amount of privileges, both by my work and just by like my like identity in the world, right? But I'm denied some and afford some. It's you know, y'all know, like it's the world. But where I'm from, there are people who are not afforded half of the privileges I am, and I think that it's important for me to always write with that in mind and write from where I'm from. Yeah. Did I answer your question? Is that was a good question? Yeah, Ari.
Yeah. So I don't know if you like the Arctic Monkeys, but one of their songs, they just straight up took one of John Cooper Clarke's poems and put it to song.
Yeah.
And I think their poems would be great for that. So who would you want to do that to your poems?
Probably no one, honestly. Because I think, I know that song, and that's actually, they did that well. They did a really good job with that. I think, you know, I wouldn't want it to be a musician I like. I think that would be hard. But I think there are some musicians who could do it well. I'm always, some of my favorite singer-songwriters are also, I think poets. You know, I grew up on the music of Bruce Springsteen, and my dad was a Springsteen fan, and there was Springsteen in my house, and there's Springsteen beyond, you know, and so I think maybe I would not say Springsteen, but I would. So this is gonna a roundabout answer. So in like the tree of music, right? If Bruce Springsteen is a tree, like the root of the tree, I think offshoots are like The Replacements and Cheap Trick, and then the Gaslight Anthem, I think, is a major. And I would have them do it, I think. Although I don't know if they. I'm pretty sure they broke up. Because their singer just released a solo album that had a very I just broke up with my band feel. But I would pick the Gaslight Anthem. I think they would be great. I think they're brilliant, and even though I haven't really enjoyed their last 2 albums, but I think maybe they'll get it back if they're still a band. I think when you love a band, you know, you just root for them even when they put out mediocre works. And so I'm at this holding pattern with the Gaslight Anthem where I'm like, oh, they'll get it back, even though they may not get it back. You know, it's like.
Maybe your poems is how they get it back.
Maybe your poems is how they get it back. It might be over for good. There was an NBA player named Nick Anderson. Does anyone remember Nick Anderson? No. So in the NBA Finals, the game 1 of the NBA Finals, he could have made. The game was tied. There's 10 seconds left. All he has to do is sink some free throws to clutch the game, to put the game in clutch. He misses all 3. Then he goes to the line again and misses 3 more. And he was never the same. His scoring average dipped 10 points the next year. In 3 years, he's out of the league because he couldn't make free throws, right? He mentally couldn't do it. And I think that happens with bands. I think, and I know this is branching off your answer a lot, but I think a big problem is a band has albums that aren't there and they don't do well, and I think it's hard to get that back. And I think maybe the Gaslight Anthem are there. And I think that happened with I think that happened with a bunch of punk bands when the era was changing. Anyway, sorry, rambling. Other questions? These are all good questions. Someone ask another one. Yeah, what's up?
Have you ever thought of, performing your poems to music yourself instead of someone?
Music I produced, or just hopping on the instrumental in.
Either or, actually. Maybe existing one, or maybe when you produce something, just your poetry with music.
Like J Baz.
Oh yeah, Baz does that well. I don't think I would sound good. I think it's cool when other people do it. I think it's really cool when other people do it. One of our friends, J.W. Basillo, from Chicago, he and my friend Franny Choi, and I think there's a good video of her doing this maybe, has a loop pedal in all these instruments. Franny just has a guitar, maybe. Was it a guitar that she had? Yeah. A loop pedal and a guitar and vocals, and it makes this interesting instrumental wave of and then reads their poems over it. That's so dope. I don't think I'm equipped to do that. I think my voice sounds too weird to effectively mesh with any music. I did once do a collaborative project with a bunch of poets, and this is early in my writing life, so the poem was awful, where we all read over an Explosions in the Sky instrumental. I forget which one. It was one of their popular ones. I don't know, but it for me it sounded awful. For everyone else, it sounded great. I don't know. I love that idea, but I think that I'm not the right person for it. I feel maybe I'll try it though. Now you've got me thinking. Yeah, just run some just alone in my house, so that no one will hear it. Just run some tests, and then slowly release them onto the internet under a different name, so that no one knows it's me. That is actually a good idea. Surprise, right? I feel finishing one project, for me at least, was really comforting, but made me want to just run into a bunch of different other things. And now you've got now I'm gonna like get on like GarageBand and start like making instrumentals. Is there other questions? I feel like that's like I don't know. Other questions? Anyone? Yo, what's up, man? No, yeah, let's just me and you all day.
Good. This one's more about like the working in the music industry.
Yeah.
I don't know how long you've been working in it, but like how has it changed a lot more? Because I know a lot of like internet music kind of like sources are kind of like changing, making it a lot harder for artists to make it.
Yeah.
So, just curious what you think about
I was actually talking about this earlier today. I was complaining as my editor at MTV is a writer I love and appreciate. Her name's Jessica Hopper. You all should read her stuff. And I was complaining because she like hit me up on Slack and she's like, all right, here's this album's coming out tonight, this album's coming out tomorrow. And I was like, so the biggest thing, I think, the problem is there's no concept of, and I'm gonna rant about this and I'm sorry in advance, there's no concept of like normalcy and comfort in a release schedule anymore, because everyone is like, we have to have a surprise sudden album release. So what this does, this hurts like, it doesn't really serve anyone, right? When you think about it, it doesn't serve music fans. It serves the artist, that's it, right? It doesn't serve music fans. It doesn't serve like music writing. You don't get good music writing. It doesn't serve like the consumption of music, right? So if who released this? James Blake, right? So James Blake drops an album out of nowhere at midnight, and then by like tomorrow morning, music writers have to have an opinion on it. That's like shitty, right? You get a bunch of shitty music writing, and then you get like, no one is sitting with albums anymore because they're so concerned about what's coming next, right? I could not comfortably, well, I did because I make a conscious decision to like I don't care, I'm gonna listen to this, enjoy it. But a lot of people couldn't sit with and process Drake's new album, for example, because they were so worried about like, if I spend time processing this, am I gonna miss something that comes out in my sleep? That is like a horrible state of music fandom because it is all revolving around this anxiety. And what it does is it doesn't allow people to process music as it comes. I miss release schedules, right? I miss the anticipation. I miss like looking at my calendar and being like, man, a month from now, this album's coming out and I want to hear it. Instead of being like, oh man, I don't know, Frank Ocean's album could come out like any minute. You know what I mean? And then when it comes out, I have to have a thought on it. And then by the time I'm finished with that, something else will arrive. And I think that people think this is good for like, it's good for the artist, right? It's all about combating leaking, like albums leaking, but it hurts the bottom line of like reading good, nuanced opinions on music. And so for me, as someone who writes about music like for a living and is immersed in like these really having like slow, part of it is fun. It's fun for me to like get on Twitter and like scroll through Twitter as a new album is out and hearing everyone like instant takes on it. But another part of me is like, man, I would love to read a good critical take on an album as big as Drake's album, right? Like, but a week and a half after it comes out. Like, I want someone who sat with it. And don't get me wrong, I don't think that album's great, but I think that for it to have gotten the reviews it got, for that many bad reviews, it told me that people were not listening to it. People were like giving it one listen and then thinking, what's next? And I think, so that's the biggest way that I think the internet has, in a way, Beyonce pushed that forward, right? Beyonce like dropped that surprise album, 2013, where like we went to bed and then woke up and there was like just a whole Beyonce album like on the internet. You know what I mean? Like once that happened, it was exciting and cool, but I didn't expect every artist in the world to be like, this is the new media, this is a new way. You know what I mean? I expect, because some artists can't like real talk, like people aren't checking for a surprise James Blake album. Like you could have just released that shit on a Tuesday like everyone else. You know what I mean? Like people aren't that excited, but as the biggest pop stars in the world go, so goes the climate. And I think the climate is really great right now for artists, but not necessarily great for like people who enjoy reading about music. And I'm someone who enjoys reading about music, so it's tough. Yeah, I got you next. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
What's up, Ari? Yeah.
I have a couple of follow-up questions just based on what you said.
Yeah.
So the first one, very simple. Taylor Swift has released an album on every odd number and every even number year in the last 10 years. Do you think her next album will be a surprise album, since we're talking about?
I think it'll probably have to be. I don't think, she's in real talk, and this, I don't mean this to be like rude or, Taylor Swift's not like there are people who are like trendsetters and there are people who kind of like fold into the trends, right? I mean, Taylor Swift's entire career is like trend folding, and like she is good at it, and like she sells a lot of records. And in order for her to do that, like she can't, she has to keep up with everyone else. It's all about keeping up with the Joneses.
And my second one is, so I don't teach music, but I talk a lot about music when I teach. And one of the things that I've noticed is that, and this is gonna age me, but none of the young kids can sit down and listen to an album beginning to end. Like just start on track 1 and just listen to the entire thing. And I think some albums, especially the newer ones,
Yeah.
you can listen kind of piecemeal and just listen to half of it and you get okay. But there are some albums that you just have to do that, and there's no other way to really get a feel for it.
Yeah.
And so, what do you think how would you articulate that sense of you have to listen to it? Like this is an album, not a singles album.
Right. I mean, I think the only way that changes is if there are more complicated albums made with no singles. If there are more albums like Kendrick Lamar's last album, or if here's the reason I like Carly Rae Jepsen a lot, because Emotion is a complicated pop album with no singles. There is not a single song in Emotion that made the top like 50, right? So what that does is it tells a story, right? And I think what that does is makes people listen to it all the way through. But right now, I mean, the climate isn't for that. I mean, people want to hear the like, especially in hip hop, but also in pop music. I think very truly, country is perhaps the last genre where people are listening to albums all the way through. Country music record, I would encourage everyone to read a review of a country music album. The best music writing, the best album reviews, not the best music writing, the best album reviews are happening in country music right now, because the genre is in a place where it's like literally fighting for its life, right? It's fighting so R&B in the mid 2000s was where country is now. Everything is being just usurped by pop music, right? Pop music is like the grand gentrifier of music. It's like moving into all these like subgenres and swallowing everything. R&B is now pop. Country is going to be pop in like 2 years, if it's not already. But what country is? I think it's mostly already there, right? Like Florida Georgia Line is not a country band, right? They're like they're not. Yeah. I mean, but that's just another word for pop. And so right now you have all these like old school country music writers who are hammering away on these brilliant reviews that are trying to save the genre. And that's the only way people are going to listen to albums all the way through, right? If they feel like their genre is in danger, or if they feel like they're an endangered species. So, I mean, I think, again, there are things in music that are just never going to happen again. And I think people listening from, this generation, and I think your generation is great. Y'all are not that far removed from my generation. But I think listening from track 1 to track end is, I don't know if we have the patience for it anymore. And again, it all feeds into this climate where like we're rushing to get to the next musical thing. There was a point in like February where Formation came out, and then Rihanna's album came out, Formation came out, and then Rihanna's single came out, Work, and then Drake released a song. And Formation, in like a week and a half, and for me, Formation felt like it was months ago, right? Like, I was like, this felt like it happened months ago. Because it's just too much, right? It's like, sorry. What was your question?
This was like back when you were talking about surprise albums.
Of course.
What are your opinions on Beyonce's Lemonade?
I think it's beautiful visually. I watched it.
Like your times?
Yeah. I mean, I watched it in a hotel in Vancouver alone, and it was very jarring. And I had to keep pausing it. You know what I mean? I don't know how people watch it all the way through, just like off the jump. Like, I had to keep pausing it. And much like Formation, I didn't really process the songs because I think the visuals were really important. And then when I listened to the songs, I was like, well, okay, whatever. Some of them were fine, some of them were okay. But I think Lemonade's legacy, I think, will be in those visuals. There's a lot of blackness like reaching across a lot of different, it's like diasporas, right? It's just like not, and like the southernness of it, I think. I don't really care about the soap opera part, if I'm being honest. Like, I don't really care if Jay-Z cheated on Beyonce. Like, I know that like I maybe should care because a part of like consuming that album is caring, but like I don't, like my life is not impacted by it. So I have a harder time investing in that part of it. What I really liked about Lemonade, what I did not have a hard time investing in was, again, the visuals and kind of the messages of, I think it's very like, it is very woman-centered in a way that, and woman-driven in a way that like a lot of pop music just isn't allowed to be or comfortably allowed to be. But yeah, I don't know if I could watch it again. It was so intense. And I know intense is a word that people throw around a lot, but like for real, for me, it was like very intense. Like when I finished it, I just sat up in the tiny hotel room and I was in, and I was like, I don't think I can watch that again. But the songs are okay. Some of the songs are great. I think there's like a country song on there that's just like so great. And I am not a gigantic Beyonce fan. I think she's fine. But I really enjoy watching her take risks. I think hearing her take risks in her music is cool because she doesn't have to. Because she could sell 1 million records by like breathing, right? You know what I mean? I think you get to a certain point when you're an artist where you can like, you know, and I think in that stratosphere like Beyonce, Rihanna, Drake, Taylor Swift, and you know, maybe Kanye West. And so I think when you get in that stratosphere, the idea of taking risk is becomes more important. And so it doesn't matter if I like Kanye or, you know, Taylor Swift or Rihanna. I want to hear them taking risks. And so Beyonce, like, there's some risks on that Lemonade that were beautiful, I thought. I would want to see Taylor Swift or Rihanna especially follow suit with more risky pop music. Yeah. Was that a good answer? Sorry, I answered too many questions probably.
No, that's great. Maybe if people would like, they can talk about your book, maybe get a copy or something.
Oh yeah, you can get a copy of my book, sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
I have exactly 9 copies because I could only carry that many back from the release in Minneapolis. But you can also like pre-order it online. Right now it's like doing better than we thought in pre-orders. So you should add to that chorus of it's currently selling more than like the 2080th translation of the Iliad. So that's really important to me. Thank you all.
Okay.